No soldier come ridin' in to announce it. No messenger brung the news. But more patrols begun to show their faces, more horse tracks cut the mud, and more iron showed up. Roads that hadn't been there before started slicing through the forest, and military posts sprung up like toadstools after rain. To the folks in the Everglades, the change warn't political. It was something you could feel in your bones. For the city folks, annexation meant papers and laws and borders. For Josiah it meant there warn't no place left where American law couldn't reach. There warn't no refuge no more, and runnin' warn't enough. Because from now on, there warn't nowhere left to run to. Josiah remembered the first time he crossed that border. It hadn't been no line in the dirt, it had been a hope. Back then he believed there was another world, a place where chains couldn't reach. And that world had slipped away without making a sound. In the months that come after, villages begun to burn more frequent. The soldiers didn't even hesitate at the old line no more. A young feller asked Josiah one day, "Why's more of them comin' now?" Josiah answered without even looking at him, "'Cause now they reckon they got the right to be here." Nobody in the swamps had signed nothin'. Nobody had asked them. And yet their lives was changed clean through. An old Seminole said it plain. "They make papers betwixt themselves, and they sell us whole." One night Josiah's bunch moved deeper still into the Everglades. They was fleeing because they understood. It warn't about day-to-day scrappin' by no more. It was the beginning of something longer, colder, and more pitiless. And for the first time, Josiah seen it clear as daylight. Freedom don't vanish when somebody takes it. It vanishes when somebody decides it never was there in the first place. Well now, Josiah, he lived right in amongst them Seminoles, deep in the swamps where the cypress hung heavy with moss and the gators slid quiet as sin. Them folks was fugitives, pure and simple, runaways with nary a place left on God's green earth to run to. Sometimes they'd slip north through the piney woods, tradin' pelts for a pinch of gunpowder, and whatever rumors the wind carried from the settlements. Other times they'd strike quick as a cottonmouth, then vanish clean as a whistle, leavin' nothin' but tracks in the mud and a heap of trouble behind 'em. It warn't war, and it warn't peace either. It was just one o' them unwritten laws the good Lord never put down on paper. Each side knowed the other was there, and that was enough. Come 1823, the Americans up and hollered that they'd fix the whole blamed mess. They scratched out what they called the Treaty of Moultrie Creek, sayin' on a piece o' paper that the Seminoles got their reservation and the rest o' the land was give over nice and legal. But nobody from the swamp ever laid a finger on that treaty. To Josiah and his companions it was real enough, but to the rest of them it might as well be been writ in smoke. It didn't exist, not in the sawgrass nor in the black water. Time rolled on, slow and sticky as molasses in July, and Josiah, he growed into something more'n just a survivor. He come to be a sort o' bridge betwixt the Seminoles and them shadowy communities of fugitives hid deep in the Everglades. Folks that belonged to nobody and nothin', former slaves and their young uns, people with no past to speak of and mighty little future if the white man had his say. To the big plantations up in the south, them black folks hidin' out was a pure insult. To the Americans it was a problem that needed fixin'. But to Josiah, why, it was his world, the only one he knowed. Then in 1830 the news come driftin' through the swamp like a death sentence on the breeze. Old Hickory hisself, Andrew Jackson, had signed the Indian Removal Act. A young feller, eyes wide as saucers, come up to Josiah one evenin' by the fire and asked, "What in tarnation does this here mean?" Josiah looked at him a long spell, the firelight flickerin' on his face, and says, "It means they don't want us livin' here no more, son. Not a bit. It ain't about treaties nor compromise no longer. It's just a plain old decision to move us out, lock, stock, and barrel." Warn't long after that, in 1832, another treaty floated down from the north, the Treaty of Payne's Landing. Said the Seminoles had agreed to pack up and leave for good. Josiah hisself heard a Seminole leader laugh, a bitter, dry laugh that cut through the night like a rusty saw. "Who signed that paper?" the old chief growled. "Some ghosts, Meb? 'Cause it sure warn't none of us." Nobody in the swamp knowed a blamed thing about it. Nobody had been there. But to the Americans that scrap o' paper was gospel enough, and so they begun to come. First the soldiers, marchin' through the sawgrass with their boots suckin' at the mud. Then they throwed up forts and drawed roads on their military maps like they owned the whole everlasting place. Fort King rose up out yonder, a sign as plain as daylight that the world had done changed forever, and not for the better. The swamp warn't theirs no more, and everybody knowed it. Josiah he warn't no green young buck when he first come face to face with Osceola. Nah, he met him when that Seminole chief was already a full-grown man what had the answer burnt right into his heart. We ain't leavin'. There weren't a speck o' bargainin' in them words. Not one lick. It was the end o' talk, pure and simple. Back in them days, when the swamp swallow a feller's footprints and keep every secret tighter in a miser's fist, there was a man named Wiley Thompson what figured the whole wide world could be set straight with nothin' but ink and paper. At Fort King, where the pine logs still smelled sharp o' resin and the whole place run on regular army discipline, Thompson lived betwixt two worlds. To his own people he was the big man, state agent, keeper o' treaties, the very voice o' the United States. But to the Seminoles he warn't no diplomat and he sure warn't no messenger. He was the feller what come to say, plain as day, y'all got to git. Every blessed day he'd preach about the law and that there treaty o' Payne's Landing what the white men claimed was signed fair and square. He'd say it had to be minded, that the land in Florida didn't belong no more to the folks what had always lived on it. And he'd finish up with the same old tune. Y'all going to the Indian Territories. Josiah, he watched him from a distance. Didn't see him as no man atoll, just a sign that the world fixin' to run 'em off warn't never going to quit. To the people o' the Everglades, Thompson warn't the voice o' reason. He was the livin' proof the decision was done made. When Thompson and Osceola finally met, it warn't no palaver. It was a collision, head-on. Osceola didn't waste many words, but the ones he did speak was simple and final. We ain't leavin'. Thompson wouldn't have it. To his mind, refusin' warn't no choice. It was a problem that needed fixin'. So he up and banned Osceola from Fort King and shamed him right there in front o' his own people. Some folks whispered the white men even clapped him in chains for a night. Thompson aimed to teach him a lesson. But to Osceola, dishonor could only be washed out one way. Come the mornin' o' December the 28th, 1835, things looked mighty ordinary. Light slanted soft through the pines, the ground was dry, and the air hung still. Wiley Thompson stepped out the fort gates for his regular walk. Josiah was there, hid back a ways, but he could see Thompson and his little bunch plain. Then the woods changed without moving a leaf. The silence got too deep, and the air tightened like a bowstring. Out from the trees the Seminole warriors poured, Osceola at the head. Their war whoops split the mornin' wide open. The first shot cracked the world in two. Thompson dropped like a stone. Then with him followed quick. There weren't time for nothin', no big speeches, no fuss. It was over 'fore the echo died. Then the forest slipped back into quiet, same as if nothin' had happened atoll. Josiah stayed froze where he was. There weren't no triumph in his breast, no joy. Only the cold, hard knowin' that there weren't no turnin' back now. To the United States this was an outrage, a flat-out declaration o' war. To the Seminoles it was the only answer they had left after years o' crooked treaties, empty promises, and orders handed down by folks with no right to give 'em. The answer was short: we don't accept. We don't leave. And we don't bow. That evening, down by the water, the young one asked, "Is it over now?" Josiah looked out across the swamp and said quiet-like, "Nah, son. Now it only commences. And there ain't no goin' back." In the black heart o' the Everglades, where folks lived betwixt water and silence, it warn't just one man that died that day. The notion that things could be fixed with ink and paper and polite talk, that died too. A few days later Josiah was back in the woods, breathin' slow. Winter in Florida ain't never cold, but the air carried a weight that day. The critters was quieter. The water lay stiller. Even the wind seemed to give certain places a wide berth. A column o' American soldiers was marchin' close by. Captain Francis Dade led more'n 100 men, comin' from Fort Brooke toward Fort King. The road was narrow, hemmed in by thick woods, and looked safe enough. But in Florida, safe was a mighty dangerous word. Josiah moved alongside the Seminole warriors. Osceola leaded them all. They waited, patient as stone. No hurry, no fear. The soldiers stepped into a clearin', right out in the full glare o' the sun. Then the shots come, sharp and sudden. The first ball took the captain. Dade fell 'fore he could bark a single order. And with him, order itself tumbled. What followed warn't no battle. It was gunfire from every side, trees, grass, the very air itself. The soldiers tried to form ranks, to shoot back, but there weren't nobody to shoot at. They blazed away into the woods, and the woods answered them.